She stepped off that stagecoach with nothing, no money, no family, no future, just a worn silver locket and a broken heart. One stranger's words changed everything. What he said to her that dusty afternoon in 1879 will stay with you long after this story ends. This story reminds us that your greatest wealth was never in your pocket. It was always in your heart, your grit, and your willingness to keep going when everything is gone. Welcome to Cowboy Ember, where the spirit of the Old West lives on through stories of love, loss, courage, and the unbreakable bonds between human hearts. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to Cowboy Ember so you never miss a story worth telling.
The stagecoach rattled to a dusty stop before the old mercantile, and Miriam Rose set foot on the hard-baked dirt of Kingman, Arizona. She owned nothing more than the simple dress she wore and a worn-out silver locket that hung from a chain on her neck. It was September of 1879, and the desert heat still pressed down on the town like a heavy wool blanket, even though the worst of summer was gone. She just stood there a second, feeling lost and all alone, as the coach rumbled off in a cloud of red dust, leaving her stranded in a town where she did not know a single soul. Her hand flew to the locket, the one and only keepsake she had from her mother. Everything else was gone, turned to ash in the fire that took their boarding house in Tucson 3 weeks before. Her mother had perished in that blaze, and Miriam herself was lucky to be alive. The locket was on her neck that awful night, and she had gripped it tight while running from the flames, her nightdress singed and her feet bare on the scorched ground. Now, at 22 years old, she was penniless in a frontier town with no one to turn to and no idea what to do. The main road of Kingman stretched out in front of her, lined with buildings whose tall, false fronts advertised supplies, saloons, and a place to sleep, but she was flat broke. Her stomach rumbled loud, a harsh reminder she had not had a bite to eat since the day before, when a nice lady on the stage shared a bit of jerky and some hardtack biscuits. Miriam glanced down at her locket, thinking she might have to trade it for a meal and a bed. But the very idea made her heart ache with sadness. It was the last piece of her family she had. "Are you lost, ma'am?" a low voice asked from behind her. Miriam spun around to see a man standing under the shade of the mercantile's awning. He was a tall fella, maybe in his mid-20s, with skin tanned to leather by the sun and eyes the color of strong black coffee. He had on dusty denim trousers, scuffed-up boots, and a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, showing strong arms. A worn Stetson sat on his head, keeping the harsh sun off his lean face. He looked a little rough around the edges, but there was a softness in his eyes as he looked at her with what seemed to be real concern. "I am not lost." "Not exactly," Miriam answered, working hard to keep her voice from shaking. "I only just got here, but I see now I was not fully prepared for it." The cowboy's gaze took in her whole situation, the soot on her dress, the fact she had no bags, and the way her hand was wrapped around that locket on her throat like it was holding her up. His expression softened even more as he stepped out from the shade and into the sun. Up close, Miriam saw he had a kind face under the dust and stubble, with a square jaw and a mouth that seemed like it smiled often, even if it was serious right then. "Name is Wade Harrison," he said, tipping the brim of his hat. "I ride for the Double H Ranch, just a ways out of town. Are you running from trouble or just fallen on hard times?" Miriam felt hot tears sting her eyes. "But we had a boarding house back in Tucson. There was a fire. She never made it out, and I lost everything but this." She lifted the locket for him to see, and Wade's eyes followed it. He looked at the tarnished silver for a long moment. Then his gaze returned to her face with a look she could not quite make out. "I am mighty sorry for your loss," he said softly. "That is a heavy burden to carry." "Thank you," Miriam whispered. "I came to Kingman because the stage fare was all I had from the charity money the church in Tucson gave me. I figured I might find some work, but standing here now I can see what a fool's errand that was." Wade was quiet for a bit, his dark eyes looking thoughtful. Then he said a thing that truly startled her. "Ma'am, you are richer than you think." Miriam blinked at him, completely confused. She motioned to her dusty dress and her empty hands. "I have nothing. How can you say a thing like that?" "Because you are still on your feet," Wade said plainly. "You lost it all, even the person you loved most in this world. But you did not lay down and quit. You climbed onto that stage and came here to start over. That takes grit, and grit is worth more than gold in a place like this." He paused for a second, then said, "And that locket you are wearing, it might be dull, but I know good silver. That is not some cheap piece of tin. It is the real article, and it has got value. But I would bet the memories it holds mean more to you than any pile of cash." Miriam felt the tears well up again, but this time they were from thankfulness. Nobody had talked to her with that kind of understanding since her mother passed. Others had just given her looks of pity, or worse, suspicion. But Wade Harrison looked at her like she was somebody who deserved respect. "The memories are all I have," she confessed in a small voice. "I could never sell it." "Then do not you dare," Wade said with force. "There are other ways to make $1. Come on with me. Mrs. Chen has a boarding house down the way, and she is almost always in need of a good hand. I know her pretty well. She does business with our ranch. If I put in a good word for you, she will give you a fair shake. You can work for your room and meals until you get back on your feet." A little flicker of hope sparked in Miriam's heart for the first time in ages. "You would do that for me? You do not even know who I am." Wade pushed his hat back a little and gave her a small smile that completely changed his serious face. "I know enough. You are honest, you are brave, and you are not afraid of hard work. That is more than I can say for a lot of folks. Besides, my mama always said to help folks who are in a bind. She would have my hide if I just left a lady standing in the street with nowhere to go." "Your mother sounds like a very wise woman," Miriam said, and she felt the tight knot in her shoulders finally begin to loosen. "She was," Wade replied, and a flicker of old sadness in his eyes told Miriam that his mother was gone too. "Come on, Miss Rose. Let's go meet Mrs. Chen and see about getting you situated." As they walked along the dusty road, Miriam found herself watching Wade out of the corner of her eye. He walked with the steady, easy gait of a man who was at home in his own skin. His long strides were covering the ground, but he made sure to match her shorter steps. Folks called out hellos as they went by, and Wade answered everyone with a friendly wave or a nod. He was clearly known and liked around town. That said a lot about the kind of man he was, Miriam figured. A man who earned the respect of his neighbors was a man worth knowing. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a 2-story place, painted a sunny yellow that was a bright spot against all the dusty brown and the dull gray of the surrounding buildings. Right out front, a little garden was growing. It was a true wonder in that dry desert land, with vegetables that were carefully looked after, and even a few flowers fighting to stay alive in the tough weather. Wade swung the gate open and motioned for Miriam to walk ahead of him on the path leading to the house. He did not even get a chance to knock before the front door opened, showing a small Chinese lady with her dark hair tied up neatly in a bun. She had on a simple cotton dress with an apron, and her bright eyes quickly sized up both Wade and Miriam. "Wade Harrison, I might have guessed it. Was you making all that racket on my walkway? Are you already in need of more supplies? I sent 3 whole boxes of vegetables to the Double H just last week." "Not this time, Mrs. Chen," Wade answered with a smile. "I have come for a different reason today. This here is Miss Miriam Rose. She is new to town and is looking for a job and a place to stay. It occurred to me that you might need some help around your place." Mrs. Chen turned her sharp eyes toward Miriam, looking her over from her boots to her bonnet. Miriam pulled her shoulders back, refusing to look weak under the woman's inspection. Finally, after a good while, Mrs. Chen gave a slow nod. "You appear as if you have been trouble. What can you do?" "I helped my mother run our boarding house in Tucson," Miriam replied. "I can cook, Clean, wash, and mend clothes, keep the books, and see to the guests. I work hard, and I'm a quick study if there is something I do not know. Tucson, you say? Mrs. Chen's face softened just a little. I heard about that fire a few weeks ago. A terrible thing. Many people were lost. My mother was one of them, Miriam said softly. Mrs. Chen nodded once, like that single fact told her everything she needed to know. I have got a little room up in the attic. It is not much, just a cot and a washstand, but it is clean and you will have your privacy. You work for me, help me keep this place running right, and the room is yours. You will get 3 square meals a day, and a little pay on top of it. $2 a week to start. More, if you prove you are worth it. Is that a deal? A wave of relief washed over Miriam that was so strong she almost felt dizzy. Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I promise you will not be sorry. I had better not be, Mrs. Chen replied, but there was a hint of kindness in her stern face. You can start first thing tomorrow. Be here at sunup, and I will show you the ropes. She then glanced over at Wade. Are you staying for supper, Wade? I have made dumplings. I wish I could, Mrs. Chen, but I have got to get back to the ranch before it gets dark. Mr. Henderson is waiting on me. Wade turned to Miriam and tipped his hat. You will be fine now, Miss Rose. Mrs. Chen will see you are taken care of. Thank you, Mr. Harrison, Miriam said, and she poured every ounce of her gratitude into her voice. I do not know what I would have done if you had not stopped for me. Everybody needs a helping hand now and then, Wade said, his dark eyes meeting hers for just a moment more. Then he absolutely had to. Welcome to Kingman, Miss Rose. I surely hope you find whatever you are searching for here. As Wade strolled off down that dusty road, Miriam felt a feeling blossom deep inside her that had nothing to do with being thankful. There was just something about that cowboy that pulled her in, something in the quiet power of his way and the pure kindness she saw in his eyes. She told herself to get a grip. This was no time to be thinking on men, and certainly not a cowboy she had met only moments ago. She had to stay focused on putting her life back together, on finding her own 2 feet in this unfamiliar new town. Mrs. Chen guided her into the house and up the stairs to her room in the attic. It was certainly small, with the roof slanting down and a single tiny window that looked out onto the street below. But just as promised, it was tidy, and all to herself. The little bed had clean sheets, and a small rug was on the floor to keep her feet warm during those cold desert nights. After so many weeks of feeling lost and scared, having a space to call her very own, even a little room in an attic, felt like a true blessing. That night, as Miriam lay in her narrow bed, she held tight to her mother's locket and thought about all that had come to pass. She thought of the fire, of her mother's final moments, and the frightening weeks that came after. But her thoughts also drifted to Wade Harrison, and the way he had looked at her. He saw someone with worth, not just a soul in need of a handout. You are richer than you know, he had told her. And as she lay there in the quiet darkness, Miriam started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was right. The next morning came on with the kind of bright that only an Arizona desert can deliver. Miriam was up before the sun, putting on the one clean dress that Mrs. Chen had so kindly washed for her the evening prior, and she made her way downstairs. The boarding house was already humming with life. Mrs. Chen had 6 men who lived there full-time, men who held all sorts of jobs in and around Kingman, and every one of them expected a warm meal in their bellies before starting a long day's work. Mrs. Chen set Miriam to her tasks right away, showing her how the kitchen was organized and walking her through the daily household chores. Miriam poured her heart into the work, so grateful to have something to keep her hands and her mind busy. She helped make breakfast, served the boarders, scrubbed the dishes, and swept the floors, and tidied the beds. The labor felt familiar and brought her comfort, so much like the work she used to do in her own mother's boarding house that it almost felt like she had come home. The days settled into a comfortable routine. Miriam worked from the crack of dawn until well after sundown, but the long hours did not bother her one bit. Mrs. Chen was a firm but fair boss, never unkind, and she often showed Miriam small kindnesses that made the difficult work much easier to bear. The men who lived there were proper and respectful, and if one of them ever started to look at her with a bit too much interest, Mrs. Chen would put a stop to any of that nonsense right quick. For the first time since the fire, Miriam started to feel safe again. It was a good 3 weeks before Wade Harrison crossed her path again. She was out in the front garden in the cool of the evening, watering Mrs. Chen's prized vegetables, when she heard the distinct creak of the gate opening. When she looked up, she saw the familiar shape of that tall cowboy, his hat tipped down to shade his eyes from the setting sun. "Miss Rose," Wade said, and a warm smile spread across his face when he spotted her. "Mrs. Chen mentioned you were getting settled in nicely. I am mighty glad to hear that." "Mr. Harrison?" Miriam replied, putting down her watering can and tucking a stray piece of hair away from her face. She suddenly felt self-conscious about how she must have looked, her cheeks flushed from the warmth of the day and her dress a little damp from the watering. "I have been wanting to thank you properly for everything you did for me. You truly changed my life that day." Wade just waved it off. "All I did was make an introduction. You are the one putting in all the real effort. Mrs. Chen says you are the finest worker she has ever had on." Miriam felt a warm blush of pleasure at his words. "She really said that?" "She did. And Mrs. Chen is not a woman who hands out compliments she does not mean." Wade shifted his feet, looking almost bashful all of a sudden. "I was just wondering, Miss Rose, if maybe you would consider taking a walk with me. I ride into town every couple of weeks for supplies, and, well, it sure would be nice to have some company. That is, if you have the time, and if it is something you would like to do." Miriam's heart did a little jump. Every part of her said she ought to say no. She hardly knew the man, she still had chores to finish, and it just was not proper for them to be walking alone together. But when she met Wade's hopeful gaze, she heard herself say, "I would like that very much. Just let me go tell Mrs. Chen where I will be." Mrs. Chen granted her permission with a look that said she understood more than she was letting on, which made Miriam blush even more. She took off her apron, smoothed her hair down the best she could, and met Wade out on the street. They strolled together through the town as the sun dipped lower, splashing the desert sky with shades of orange and pink that made Miriam catch her breath. "I have never in my life seen sunsets like these," she said, just marveling at the gorgeous sight. "Back in Tucson, we were always too caught up in supper time to pay them much mind." "They are something else, are they not?" Wade agreed. "Sometimes when I am out on the range as the sun goes down, I just have to stop my horse and watch the colors shift and change. It makes a person feel awfully small and yet part of something huge at the same time, if that makes any sense to you." "It does," Miriam said quietly. They walked on for a bit, the silence between them easy and warm, their footsteps the only sound on the wooden boardwalk. At last she asked, "You spoke of your mother the first day we met. Has it been long since she passed on?" A shadow passed over Wade's face. 6 years now. She took sick one winter. And we just did not have the money for a real doctor. My father and I, we did all we could for her, but it just was not enough. She passed away in the spring, right when the wildflowers were starting to bloom. She always did love the wildflowers." "I am so sorry," Miriam said. "It is a terrible thing to lose your mother, no matter your age." "It is," Wade confirmed. "It hit my father something fierce. He passed on 2 years later. The doctor said it was his heart, but I think it was really a broken spirit. He just was not the same after Mama was gone." He glanced over at Miriam. "That is when I took a job with Mr. Henderson over at the Double H Ranch. He gave me work when I needed it the most, and I have been working for him ever since." "So you do understand what it feels like," Miriam said. "To lose everything and have to begin all over again." "I surely do," Wade said. "That is why I could not just keep walking that day I saw you. I saw a reflection of my own past in you. I think I saw someone who was hurting something awful but was still putting up a fight to keep on going." He stopped walking then and turned to look at her. "Would you mind if I asked you something a little personal, Miss Rose?" "Miriam," she corrected him softly. "You can call me Miriam." "Miriam," Wade repeated. and she could not help but like the way her name sounded coming from his deep voice. "That locket you always wear, I've noticed you touch it whenever you seem worried or deep in thought. Would you be willing to tell me about it, what it means to you?" Miriam's hand immediately went up to the locket at her neck. She paused for just a second, but then she decided Wade Harrison had proved he was a man she could trust. She carefully opened the locket and showed him the two tiny pictures nestled inside. One was a photograph of a young woman with dark hair and gentle eyes, her mother from many years ago. The other was a serious fella in a cavalry uniform. "This is my mother," Miriam explained. "This picture was taken long before I was born, when she was still young and full of dreams. And this here is my father. He was an officer in the cavalry. He passed away when I was just 3 years old. I have no memory of him, but my mother always told me he was a good and honorable man." Wade looked at the little photographs with real interest. "Your mother was a beautiful woman. You have her eyes. Thank you." Fire. She somehow managed to unclasp it. Fire. She somehow managed to unclasp it from her neck and push it into my hand. "She made me promise I would always keep it safe, to always remember that I came from love, even if I found myself all alone in the world." Her voice cracked on those last few words, and she felt warm tears begin to trace paths down her cheeks. Wade did not try to hush her or offer up empty words of comfort. Instead, he just reached out, his hand gently covering hers, his work-roughened palm feeling so warm and solid against her skin. They just stood right there on the boardwalk as the sun finally disappeared, and the first stars started to peek out. And Miriam cried for her mother, and Wade just held her hand and stood there with her in her sorrow. When her tears finally stopped, Miriam felt a little sheepish. "I am so sorry. I did not mean to fall apart on you like that." "Do not you dare apologize," Wade said with a firm kindness. "Grief has got to have a way out, or it will eat you up from the inside. My mama used to say that all the time." He gave her a soft smile. "Besides, what kind of friend would I be if I ran off at the sight of a few tears?" "Friend," Miriam said the word back to him, and it settled in her heart just right. In the handful of weeks since they had first met, Wade had become important to her in a way she could not quite put into words. She found herself looking forward to the days he rode into town, and she would catch herself thinking of him at the oddest times during her work. "I would like that very much, to be your friend, Wade." "I would like that too, Miriam," Wade answered, and the way he was looking at her made her think that he might just be feeling that same curious pull that she was. Over the next few months, Wade started to find more and more reasons to come into town. He always found some excuse, some supplies he needed to get, or some business he had to handle with one of the shopkeepers. But Miriam had a feeling that the real reason for his visits was her. They settled into a sweet routine of taking walks in the evenings, wandering the streets of Kingman and sharing stories about anything and everything. Wade would tell her about his life on the ranch, about the long cattle drives, the hard work, and the deep satisfaction of a job done right. And Miriam told him about her own dreams, of maybe one day opening her own business again, perhaps a small restaurant or even a dress shop, anything that would let her stand on her own 2 feet. "You are gonna do it," Wade said with pure conviction one late November evening, as they strolled under a sky dusted with stars. "You have got the kind of sand and spirit to do anything you put your mind to." "Well, I sure hope you're right," Miriam replied. The air had a new chill, and she hugged her shawl a little closer. Mrs. Chen had given it to her as a thank you for her hard work, and Miriam held it dear. "There are times I still feel so adrift, like I'm just playing pretend at having a life, when deep down I am still that scared little girl on the street, holding nothing but a locket." Wade paused his steps and turned to her in the pale moonlight. His face was a map of strong lines and soft shadows, but his eyes glowed with warmth. "You are not that girl anymore, Miriam. You have put in the work and carved out a place for yourself right here. Mrs. Chen counts on you, and this whole town knows you are as honest and dependable as they come. That is a mighty big something." "You always find the right words to lift my spirits," Miriam said. a small smile touching her lips. "I only tell you what is true," Wade answered. Then, a bit shyly, he added, "Miriam, there is something I have to say. These past few months, getting to know you, they have meant more to me than I know how to put into words. You have become the brightest part of my day, and when I am out there on the range, I catch myself thinking about you, wondering what you are up to, and just counting the minutes until I can see you again." He took in a slow, deep breath. "I reckon what I'm trying to say is my feelings for you are more than just friendly, and I just have to know if you might feel the same." Miriam's heart started hammering against her ribs so loud she was sure Wade could hear it plain as day. She had wished for this moment and feared it all at once. Wished for it because her own feelings for Wade had grown into something that stole her sleep at night. Feared it because she was terrified of getting hurt, of opening her heart just to lose someone else she cared for. But looking at Wade's sincere face, she knew she could not let fear cheat her out of something so real and good. "I do feel the same way," she confessed. "I have for a little while now. I was just too afraid to say anything, with everything still so new and all. I did not want to be presumptuous." The grin that spread across Wade's face was like the sun rising over the flatlands. "Then can I court you the right way, Miriam? I want to do this proper. You deserve to be courted proper, you hear?" "Yes," Miriam said, a laugh bubbling up full of relief and happiness. "Yes, Wade Harrison, you can court me." Wade took both of her hands in his and gave them a gentle squeeze. "You have made me the happiest man in all of Arizona this night." From that evening forward, their bond changed and grew stronger. Wade rode into town every Sunday right after church, cleaned up in his best clothes, and came calling for Miriam at the boarding house. With a knowing smile, Mrs. Chen acted as their chaperone, sitting in the parlor with her sewing, while Wade and Miriam talked. On warm days, they would sit together on the front porch. Wade brought her little gifts, like wildflowers he had picked out on the range, a smooth, pretty stone he found down by the creek, or a book of poems he reckoned she might like. In return, Miriam baked him his favorite cookies, mended his shirts, and listened with true interest to all his stories about life on the ranch. When Christmas arrived, Wade asked Miriam to spend the day out at the Double H Ranch with him and the other hands. Mr. Henderson, the ranch owner, was a gruff but good-hearted fella in his 50s who thought of his workers as his own family. His wife had passed on years ago, and he had no children of his own, so he always made a big deal of putting on a huge Christmas dinner for all the men who worked for him. Miriam was a bundle of nerves about meeting Wade's boss and the other cowboys, but she did not need to be. They welcomed her with open arms, and she had a wonderful day helping out with the cooking and getting to know the folks who meant so much to Wade. That evening, as Wade was driving her back to town in the ranch wagon, he reached over and took her hand in his. "I want you to know something," he said. "Today, watching you laughing and talking with everybody, seeing how you just fit right in with my life out here, it made me realize I am falling in love with you, Miriam Rose. I know we have not been courting for very long, and the last thing I want to do is rush you, but I just had to tell you how I feel." Miriam's breath caught right in her throat. She squeezed his hand back tight. "I am falling in love with you too, Wade. You make me believe that I can be happy again, that life can be good even after something so awful. You make me want to stop being so scared and just start living again." Wade pulled the wagon over to a stop on the side of the road. The moon was high and bright overhead, making the desert landscape look magical and new. He turned to look straight at Miriam, and when he leaned in to kiss her, she met him in the middle. The kiss was soft and sweet and filled with all the promise of tomorrow. When they finally drew apart, Miriam felt like the entire world had just shifted right under her feet. The winter months flew by in a happy blur. Miriam had never felt this way for anyone. Wade was steady as a rock, but he could also make her laugh with his dry wit. He was a hard worker, but he had a gentle touch. He was strong, but he was not afraid to let his soft side show. With him, Miriam felt safe enough to finally take down the walls she had built up around her heart. In March of 1880, Wade asked Miriam if she would go on a special ride with him. He borrowed Mr. Henderson's finest horse and buggy and drove her out into the desert just as the sun was setting. They stopped at a place where the wildflowers were just starting to bloom, painting the rocky ground in blankets of yellow and orange and purple. Wade helped Miriam down from the buggy, and then, to her utter astonishment, he dropped down on one knee. "Miriam Rose," Wade said, his dark eyes shining with deep feeling. "I told you once that you were richer than you knew, and that is still the honest truth. But I want to spend the rest of my days making sure you never have to doubt how much you are worth, or ever question how precious you are. You have brought so much light and happiness into my life, and I cannot picture a future that does not have you in it." He pulled a simple gold band from his coat pocket. "I know this ring is not much to look at, but it was my mother's, and it would mean everything to me if you would wear it. Will you marry me, Miriam? Will you be my wife?" Tears streamed down Miriam's cheeks, but for once, they were tears of pure joy, not sadness. "Yes," she said, her voice shaky with emotion. "Yes, Wade, I will marry you. Nothing in this world would make me happier." Wade stood up and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit like it was made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with all his heart, and Miriam felt like she was truly, finally home. They were married 2 months later in May in a simple service at the little church in Kingman. Mrs. Chen stood up with Miriam, and Mr. Henderson stood up with Wade. It seemed like the whole town came out to celebrate with them, and Miriam was so touched to see how many friends she had made in the 9 months since she had shown up with nothing but that locket around her neck. Mrs. Chen cried happy tears, and even that crusty old Mr. Henderson looked a bit misty-eyed watching Wade and Miriam say their vows. After the wedding, everyone celebrated at Mrs. Chen's boarding house. She had closed up shop for the day and turned the whole place into a party, with tables overflowing with food and decorations hanging from the ceiling. The whole town seemed to pack into the boarding house and spill out onto the street, all eating and drinking and dancing to the tunes of a little band they had put together. Miriam, in a simple white dress Mrs. Chen had helped her make, danced with her new husband and felt like the luckiest woman on earth. That night, Wade brought his new bride home to the small cabin he had built on the edge of the Double H Ranch. Mr. Henderson had given him a parcel of land as a wedding present, and Wade had spent every spare minute of the last 2 months building a real home for his future wife. It was only 2 rooms and a sleeping loft, but it was solid and built with care, with a stone fireplace, real glass windows, and a front porch that looked out over the wide-open desert. "Welcome home, Mrs. Harrison," Wade said, carrying Miriam right over the threshold. Miriam looked all around the cabin, her eyes wide with wonder. It was clear Wade had put so much love and thought into every little thing. There was a proper stove for cooking, shelves for their dishes and supplies, and a table he had built himself with 2 chairs to match. In the bedroom, a big bed with a carved wooden headboard was the main feature, covered with a gorgeous quilt that Mrs. Chen had made them for a wedding gift. And on the small table next to the bed, Wade had placed a little framed photograph of Miriam's parents, which he had managed to get made from the tiny pictures inside her locket. "Wade," Miriam whispered, her fingers trembling as she touched the frame, "you did all this for me." "I wanted you to have them here with us," Wade said gently. "I know how much they mean to you, and I thought maybe it would help this place feel more like home if they were here too." Miriam turned and wrapped her arms around her husband's neck, kissing him with all the love and thanks in her heart. Wade kissed her back, long and deep, and for the very first time in her life, Miriam truly understood what it felt like to be cherished, to be loved completely with no strings attached. Life on the ranch was a whole new world for Miriam, but she tackled it with all her might. She learned how to run a home with not much to spare, how to make every single drop of water count in that dry country, how to put up food for later, mend clothes, and keep a small garden growing. Wade worked long, hard hours with the cattle, usually gone before the sun was up and not returning until long after sundown. Yet Miriam never felt a trace of loneliness. She had more than enough to keep her hands busy. And more than that, she rested easy, knowing her husband would always come back home to her at the close of each day. Mrs. Chen took on a new girl to help out at the boarding house, so Miriam made the trip into town every couple of weeks to visit her old boss and dear friend. Mrs. Chen always welcomed her with a warm smile, insisting she stay for tea and dumplings, hungry for any news about life out on the ranch. "You have a glow about you," Mrs. Chen remarked one afternoon in July. "Married life certainly suits you." "I am happy," Miriam agreed. "I am happier than I ever imagined I could be after I lost my mother." "Wade is a fine man, Mrs. Chen. I am just so thankful that you put your trust in me that very first day, and that Wade took the time to help a lost soul on the street." "It was fate," Mrs. Chen said with a wise nod of her head. "You were meant to find your way here, meant to cross paths with Wade Harrison. I saw it clear as day the moment you two were standing together on my front porch." That autumn, Miriam found out she was expecting. She shared the news with Wade one evening after they had finished supper, and the look of pure, unfiltered joy on his face was a memory she would cherish for all her days. He wrapped her up in a tight embrace, burying his face in her hair. "We are going to have a baby," he said over and over, as if the words themselves were a miracle he could hardly grasp. "We are going to be a mother and a father." "We certainly are," Miriam confirmed, a mix of laughter and tears in her voice. "Are you pleased about it?" "Pleased?" Wade gently pulled back to look her in the eyes, his own shining with tears he held back. "Miriam, I am more than pleased. This is the one thing I never realized I wanted. A real home, a wife that I love with all my heart, and now a child. You have given me everything." Her pregnancy was not an easy journey. In those first few months, Miriam battled a terrible morning sickness, and the scorching summer heat of 1881 was especially unforgiving. But Wade was always right there, gentle and kind, doing whatever he could to make things easier for her. He would bring her cool water straight from the well, fan her when the heat became too much, and hold her hair back when she was ill, never once uttering a word of complaint about the extra chores. Mr. Henderson was a good man, too, and he changed Wade's work hours so he could be home more with his expectant wife. In September of 1881, 2 full years after Miriam first set foot in Kingman, her labor began. Mrs. Chen made the journey out to the ranch to help with the birth, along with the midwife, a very capable woman by the name of Mrs. Foster, who had brought nearly half the babies in that territory into the world. Wade paced back and forth outside the little cabin, too on edge to even think about sitting down. Inside, Miriam was in labor for almost 12 long hours. At last, right as the sun began to dip below the horizon, the sound of a baby's cry filled the evening air. Wade burst right through the door and saw Mrs. Chen smiling at him. "You have a son," she told him, "a fine, healthy boy with a good, strong set of lungs on him." Wade hurried over to Miriam's bedside. She was lying in their bed, worn out but glowing with happiness, holding a small bundle wrapped up in soft blankets. "Wade," she whispered, "come and meet your son." Wade gazed down at the red-faced, crying little baby and felt his heart swell in a way he never knew was possible. "He is perfect," he whispered in awe. "Miriam, he is absolutely perfect." They decided to name him William Robert Harrison, after Wade's father and Miriam's father. Little Will, as everyone started calling him, was every bit a healthy baby with a powerful cry and an appetite to match. Wade turned out to be a natural father, helping with the baby whenever he was not working, walking the floorboards with Will when he got fussy, and just looking at his son with an expression of pure wonder that made Miriam's heart feel like it would burst with love. Their life fell into a peaceful new rhythm with the baby. Miriam discovered she had a natural gift for being a mother, and she cherished taking care of her son. She would sit for hours in the rocking chair Wade had built for her, nursing Will and gazing out the window at the wide-open desert, amazed at how much her life had changed. From a frightened, heartbroken young woman who had nothing but a locket, To a joyful wife and mother with her own home and family, the change felt like nothing short of a miracle. Wade kept on working hard at the Double H Ranch, and all his effort was not could float. "Miriam," he said, scooping her up, "I'm going to take you to the park." She was so excited she looked like she could float. "Miriam," he said, scooping her up and spinning her around while she laughed and told him to stop. "Mr. Henderson is promoting me to foreman. The job comes with better pay and more land for our homestead. He told me I am the most dedicated worker he has ever had, and the most dependable. This is going to mean so much for us." "Wade, that is just wonderful," Miriam cried out. "You deserve it more than anyone. You have worked so hard for so long." "We have both worked hard," Wade corrected her gently. "This is for all of us, for our little family. With the extra pay we can add on to the cabin, maybe get some of our own livestock and start building a real future for Will and for any more children we might have." Miriam just smiled and took Wade's hand, placing it on her belly. "Well, speaking of more children, you might want to start drawing up those plans sooner instead of later." It took Wade a second to catch her meaning, but when he did, his whoop of pure joy could have likely been heard clear into town. He lifted Miriam up and spun her around, again a bit more careful of her belly this time, and gave her a long, happy kiss. "Another baby? Are you certain?" "I am certain," Miriam told him. "Due this November. I believe their second child, a little girl they named Martha Louise Harrison, arrived on a chilly November night in 1882. She was tinier than Will had been, with a little fuzz of dark hair, and her mother's own delicate face. Wade fell head over heels for his daughter, and Miriam would often find him just standing over the cradle, watching her sleep with a look of pure and total adoration. With two little ones and Wade's new duties as foreman, life was more hectic than ever before. But Miriam would not have traded it for anything in the world. She adored her small family. She adored the home they had made together, and she adored the life they were carving out for themselves in the Arizona desert. On those quiet evenings after the children were tucked in bed, when she and Wade would sit on the porch together and watch the sun go down, Miriam would sometimes touch the locket that was always around her neck. She would think about her parents, about her dear mother, and about all she had lost and all she had gained. "What are you thinking about?" Wade asked her on one of those nights, seeing the far-off look in her eyes. "I was thinking about how you told me that very first day that I was richer than I knew," Miriam said. "I did not quite understand what you were trying to say back then, but I understand it now. I thought I was poor because I had no money and no belongings, but I had my courage, my will to keep going, and a heart full of love. And those things, they are the things that truly count." Wade pulled her in closer, and she laid her head against his shoulder. "You built a beautiful life for yourself from absolutely nothing," he said. "That takes a special kind of strength. I am so proud of you, Miriam. I am so proud to be your husband." "And I am proud to be your wife," Miriam answered softly. "You saw something worthwhile in me when I could not even see it in myself. You gave me a second chance, a fresh start, and you loved me even when I was still piecing myself back together. I will never forget that, Wade. I will never, ever take it for granted." They sat there in a comfortable quiet, watching the stars pop out one by one in the darkening sky. Inside their little cabin, their children were sleeping soundly, feeling safe and warm, and so very loved. It was not a grand or fancy life, not by a long shot. They had no great wealth or fine things, but they had each other, and together they had built something strong and real that would last. For Miriam, who had once stood all alone on a dusty street with just a locket around her neck, it was more than she could have ever asked for. It was her everything. The years rolled by with the steady, familiar rhythm of ranch life. Will grew into a clever and curious boy who trailed his father everywhere he went, soaking up everything he could about cattle and horses and the tough work of a ranch hand. Martha was a bit quieter, a homebody who preferred to stay near her mother, helping with all the chores around the house. In 1884, Miriam gave birth to another son, and they named him Samuel James Harrison. Sam was a sweet, easygoing baby who seemed to have a smile on his face from the moment he was born. Wade continued to be an excellent foreman for the Double H, earning the deep respect of Mr. Henderson and all the other men on the ranch. He was a natural-born leader, firm when he needed to be, but always fair, and the whole ranch thrived with him in charge. Mr. Henderson began to count on Wade for just about everything, and folks in town started whispering that when the old man finally hung up his spurs, he just might sell the ranch to Wade for a good price. The little cabin that began as just 2 rooms and a sleeping loft grew right along with their family. Wade added a proper bedroom for the children, a bigger kitchen, and a sitting room. He put up a barn and a chicken coop, and they started to get a few head of their own cattle, the small beginning of what they hoped would one day be their very own herd. Miriam's garden bloomed under her gentle care, giving them plenty of vegetables for their own table with enough left over to sell in town. Life had its share of hardships, to be sure. There were dry spells and bitter winters, years when cattle prices dropped and money was scarce. Will caught scarlet fever when he was just 5 years old. And for 3 awful days and nights, Miriam and Wade took turns sitting by his bed, praying with all their might that he would make it through. He did, thank the good Lord. But the whole ordeal left them both shaken, with a sharp new understanding of just how precious and fragile life could be. Through all of it, Miriam kept her mother's locket right where it belonged, close to her heart. She wore it every single day, and sometimes, when she felt troubled or full of worry, she would open it up to look at the worn photographs inside, finding strength in the memory of her parents' love. She told her children stories about their grandparents, about the boarding house in Tucson, about the fire, and about how she had arrived in Kingman with nothing to her name. She wanted them to know that their family's story had not always been an easy one, a peaceful life, one that was built from pure grit and sweat. One afternoon in the summer of 1886, while Miriam was pinning laundry to the line out behind their home, she heard the telltale rattle of an approaching wagon. When she looked up, she was surprised as could be to see Mrs. Chen climbing down from a buggy with one of the fellas from town driving. Miriam had not laid eyes on her dear old friend in a few months, since having 3 little ones made trips into town a rare occasion. "Mrs. Chen," Miriam called out, wiping her damp hands on her apron as she hurried on over. "Well, what a fine surprise. Is everything all right?" "Everything is just fine," Mrs. Chen promised her, but her face was somber. "I came all this way because I have some news, and I wanted to tell you face to face instead of just sending a letter. I am selling the boarding house. Miriam, I am getting on in years, and the work has become too much for these old bones. I have already found a buyer, a sweet young couple from California, and I am going to live with my nephew out in San Francisco." A wave of sadness washed over Miriam at the news. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was her very first home in Kingman, the place where she had begun to piece her life back together. "I'm going to miss you something awful," she said, giving the older woman a tight hug. "You were so kind to me when I had absolutely nothing. You gave me a chance when nobody else would have." "You earned every single thing you have," Mrs. Chen said with a firm nod. "You were the hardest worker I ever did see, and I knew right from the start that you were going to make a real life for yourself." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small parcel wrapped up in brown paper. "I brought something for you. I have been holding on to it for all these years, just waiting for the right moment to give it to you." Confused, Miriam carefully unwrapped the gift. Inside, she found a small leather journal, old and worn, with her own mother's name pressed into the cover. "This belonged to my mother," Miriam said, her voice trembling. "But how in the world did you get it? Everything was lost in that fire." "Not everything," Mrs. Chen said gently. "After the fire, I wrote a letter to the church there in Tucson, the very one that gave you the money for the stagecoach ticket. I asked them if anything at all had been saved from your mother's boarding house. They sent me this journal. It was sitting in the church office because your mother had been keeping their books for them. I have kept it safe all this time, waiting until you were settled and happy enough to be able to read it without it causing you too much pain." With shaking hands, Miriam opened the journal. The pages were filled with her mother's tidy handwriting, diary entries, recipes, and little bits of poetry and advice. It was like getting a piece of her mother back, a voice she believed she had lost for good. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she gently turned the pages. "Thank you," she whispered to Mrs. Chen. "This means more to me than you could ever possibly imagine." Mrs. Chen patted her hand kindly. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Miriam. You took the very worst thing that could ever happen and made it into something beautiful. Now that is what I call real strength." After Mrs. Chen departed, Miriam sat right there on the porch and read her mother's journal from the first page to the last. The children played happily in the yard while she lost herself in the words. And when Wade returned home that evening, he found her still sitting there, holding the journal tightly to her chest. "Miriam," he asked, his voice full of concern, "what is the matter?" "Nothing is wrong," Miriam said, a smile breaking through her tears. "Mrs. Chen brought me the most wonderful gift, my mother's journal. I have been reading her words, hearing her voice in my head all afternoon." Wade. "There is an entry in here from the very night before she passed away. She wrote all about me, about how proud she was of the woman I was becoming, and about how she knew that I would get through whatever life decided to throw my way, because I was strong. She knew, Wade. Somehow, she just knew I would be all right." Wade sat down on the step beside her and gathered her into his arms. "Of course you would be all right. You are the strongest person I have ever known." That night, Miriam placed her mother's journal into her small collection of treasures. She kept it in a wooden box alongside her locket, the letters Wade wrote her when they were courting, and other precious mementos. Sometimes, when she was missing her mother something fierce, she would take out the journal and read a few passages, and it made her feel close to her all over again. In 1888, Mr. Henderson took ill. He had been slowing down for a couple of years, as the hard ranching life was finally taking its toll, but a terrible bout of pneumonia that winter nearly took him. When he finally recovered, he called Wade over to his house for a serious talk. "I am not going to be around much longer," Mr. Henderson said, straight to the point. "I can feel it in my bones, and when I go, I want to know that the Double H will be in good hands. You have been like a son to me, Wade. You have worked harder and been more loyal than any man I have ever had on my payroll. I want you to buy this ranch from me. We will figure out a fair price and set up payments you can handle, so what do you say?" Wade was speechless. "Mr. Henderson, I do not know what to say. That is mighty generous of you, but are you certain? This ranch has been your entire life." "Which is exactly why I want you to have it," Mr. Henderson said. "I know you will take good care of it, keep it running strong, and I kind of like the idea of staying on here in my house and watching you run the whole place. It will give an old man like me something to live for." Wade talked over the offer with Miriam that night, and she told him he should take it. "This is everything we have been working for," she said. "Our very own ranch, something to leave to our children. We can do this, Wade. Together, there is not anything we cannot do." And so, Wade became the new owner of the Double H Ranch, renaming it the Harrison Ranch. Even though most everyone in the area still called it the Double H out of habit, it was a massive responsibility and a heavy financial load. But Wade was up to the challenge. He turned out to be not just a fine foreman, but a brilliant owner, making smart choices about livestock, grazing lands, and water rights. The ranch kept on thriving, and in just a few years, Wade had paid back a large part of the money he owed to Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson lived for 3 more years, long enough to see Wade truly established as a successful rancher, and to meet Miriam and Wade's 4th child, a daughter they named Catherine Rose Harrison, who was born in 1890. He passed on peacefully in his sleep one night in the spring of 1891, and Wade mourned him like the father he had been. The 1890s were good years for the Harrison family. The ranch was doing well. The children were growing up healthy and strong, and the love between Wade and Miriam only grew deeper with every passing season. They had their challenges, of course. There are always challenges in ranch life, but they met them side by side, and that made all the difference in the world. Will grew into a responsible young man who had a natural gift for ranching, working right alongside his father and learning the business from the ground on up. Martha was a smart and artistic girl, with a knack for drawing and painting that was a surprise to everyone. Sam was the charmer of the family, always laughing and telling jokes, and could talk his way out of just about any kind of trouble. And little Catherine was the baby, adored by her older brother and sisters and her parents. She had a sweet nature and the kindest heart. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1895, Wade gave Miriam a beautiful new dress he had special ordered all the way from San Francisco. She wore it to a party the other ranching families threw for them. And as they were dancing together underneath the stars, Wade pulled her in close and whispered right in her ear. "Do you remember what I told you on that first day we met?" he asked. "That you were richer than you knew." "I remember," Miriam said, smiling up at him. "Well, I was right," Wade said. "But what I did not know back then was how much richer you were going to make me. You have given me everything that matters, Miriam. A home, a family, a life worth living. I love you more today than I did on the day I married you. And I promise I will love you even more tomorrow than I do today." Miriam felt her eyes start to well up with tears. Even after 15 years of marriage, Wade could still make her cry with his words. "I love you too," she said. "You saved my life that day in Kingman, Wade Harrison. And every single day since, you have made my life worth saving." They shared a kiss right there under the stars, with all their friends and family around them. And Miriam thought about just how far she had come. From a desperate woman with nothing to her name but a locket, to a successful rancher's wife with 4 beautiful children and a life overflowing with love and purpose. The road had not been easy, but every single step had been worth it. As the years rolled on, the Harrison Ranch became one of the most successful outfits in the whole territory. Will eventually took the reins on most of the day-to-day work, which let Wade slow down some as he got into his 50s. Martha married a kind young man from town and started her own family, but she lived close enough to visit often. Sam decided he wanted to be a lawyer and went off to school in California, sending long letters home about all his adventures. Catherine was still at home, helping her mother and getting ready to become a school teacher. Through it all, Miriam kept her mother's locket right there, close to her heart. It was tarnished and worn now, the silver rubbed smooth in spots from all the years of her touching it. But it was still more precious than any jewel. Sometimes her grandchildren would ask to see it, and she would open it up ever so carefully and show them the faded pictures of their great-grandparents. She would tell them the story of how their grandmother came to Arizona with nothing but that locket, and how a kind cowboy had told her she was richer than she knew. "Was he right, Grandma?" one of Martha's children asked her one time. "Were you rich?" Miriam smiled and looked over at Wade, who was dozing in his rocking chair on the porch, his face looking peaceful and content. "Oh, yes, my sweet girl," she said, softly. "He was completely correct. I just was not aware of it then. But I possessed all the things required to make a fine life. I had bravery, resolve, optimism, and the ability to feel love, and those qualities are more valuable than every bit of gold in California." In the year 1910, Kingman had a big party for its 30th anniversary of being officially founded, and there was a huge festival with people giving talks, with music playing, and folks dancing. Miriam and Wade were there, both of them in their 50s by then, their hair with streaks of gray. But the affection they had for one another was as strong as ever. The town's mayor delivered a speech about the early settlers who had established the town, and he made a special point to tell Miriam's story of how she came with empty pockets and grew to be one of the most admired women in the entire area. Mrs. Harrison embodies all the fine qualities of Kingman. The mayor declared, "She arrived with only her hope and her will to succeed, and from that, she created a life that motivates every one of us. She and her husband Wade have brought up wonderful children, managed a thriving ranch, and given back to this community in more ways than we can count. They represent the very soul of what makes Kingman a great place to live." Miriam's cheeks turned red from all the notice, but Wade gently pressed her hand and said in a low voice, "He is telling the truth. You are a true inspiration." "No, we are an inspiration," Miriam corrected. "I could not have done any of this if you were not here, Wade. You were the person who recognized my worth when I felt I had none left. You were the one who offered me an opportunity, and you were the one who had the bravery to take that risk." Wade answered, "We made a good team, Miriam Rose. The very best team," Miriam agreed. While they were dancing at the party that evening, Miriam could feel her locket moving softly on her chest. And in her heart she gave a quiet word of thanks to her mother, to her father, and to every person who had given her help on her path. Her mind went back to the frightened girl she once was, getting off that stagecoach 31 years earlier, all by herself and with no hope. And she was amazed at the long road that led her to where she stood now. Her life had certainly not been simple. She had known sorrow and grief, tough labor and doing without. However, she had also known love. A great deal of love, happiness, and a sense of belonging. She had created a family, a place to call home, and something to leave behind. She had transformed terrible events into victories, and turned what was lost into something gained. She was living proof that a person could have nothing left and still discover a path to being happy. Wade and Miriam both lived long lives into their 70s, long enough to watch their children get settled and find their own happiness, and even long enough to cradle their great-grandchildren. They stayed completely dedicated to one another right up to the last day, and when Wade eventually passed on in his sleep in 1923 at the age of 71, Miriam grieved for him with a heavy heart, but she found solace in the knowledge that they had shared a complete and wonderful life together. Miriam joined her dear husband 2 years after that, during the springtime of 1925, with her children and grandchildren all around her. The day they laid her to rest, her son Will discovered his mother's locket sitting on the table next to her bed. When he opened it up, he looked at the old faded pictures of his grandparents and found tucked behind them a little slip of paper with his father's writing on it. The note said just one thing: "You have more riches than you realize." A small smile came to Will's face as tears fell, and he gently shut the locket. He knew he would give it to his own daughter one day, along with the story of how a young woman in need, with only a locket to her name, had crossed paths with a good-hearted cowboy who recognized what she was truly worth, and how together they created a life that was both enduring and lovely in the rugged but scenic Arizona desert. Theirs was a romance that would be told forever, a testament to the strength of hope and resolve, and the power of true love to change everything. For many years to come, the Harrison Ranch kept on thriving, and the tale of Miriam and Wade turned into a treasured family legend, passed down from fathers and mothers to their sons and daughters. It served as a lesson that wealth is not just about money, and that often the people with the least are, in fact, the richest of all, if we can only find the bravery to see the valuable things we hold inside of our own hearts. That locket stayed with the family, kept safe and cherished through the years, a real, physical connection to their history and a token of their origins. When all was said and done, Wade had been completely correct on that day back in 1879, when he told a hopeless young woman on a dirt road that she had more wealth than she realized. Miriam already had all the tools she required to create an amazing life. She just needed a person to have faith in her, to offer her an opportunity, to care for her when things were tough, and to share her joy in the good times. Wade was that person for her, and the two of them built something that endured long after they had passed on. A heritage of love and strength that would motivate people for many years. Their personal history captured the true spirit of the American West. It was a land where folks could start over completely, where putting in the effort and having a strong will was more important than how much money you had or your family name, where love could grow even in the most difficult of settings. Miriam Rose Harrison, who came to Kingman with just a locket, left behind a successful ranch, 4 children, 14 grandchildren, and so many great-grandchildren that it was hard for anyone to keep track. But even more important, she passed down a tale of hope and toughness, a reminder that every one of us has more riches than we think. If only we can find the bravery to see our own value and the good sense to take help when someone offers it. And she left the timeless model of a love that completely changed two people's lives and started waves that would travel across the years, touching folks she would never know, but who would listen to her story and draw strength from it. Ultimately, that might have been the most valuable treasure of all, a life lived to its fullest, with complete love, and never to be forgotten.